Wasabi guys, welcome back to another Commander video. This time I'm going to be ranking all of the Praetor cards in Magic the Gathering. And there are more than you might think initially, because some did get an errata. And as always, before we get into it, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel. Gonna be starting the new year off here pretty strong, planning on making a video at least every single day. Maybe not full-length videos, but I'm at least going to be making short-length ones, so your support does mean a lot. The 13th one, and probably the worst Praetor you could choose, is Ebon Praetor from Fallen Empires. Now, Fallen Empires as a set was pretty awful. Goes without saying this one's not going to offer you much compared to any other Praetor on this list. Cool artwork though. It's just that having to sacrifice a creature during your upkeep in order to keep nullifying this -2/-2 counter is the opposite of good, and the only upside to that is if you're sacrificing Thrall creatures, which it's not super common. You would end up getting a +1 counter on it, and that's just +1 power. So yeah, counters back in this time of Magic were very weird. Number 12, we have Sanguine Praetor, another errata Praetor. Still not going to be as good as the Phyrexian ones, but you do at least see that there is something of value here when you sacrifice a creature. Whenever you sacrifice a creature for that 1 black mana, you destroy each creature with the same converted mana cost as the sacrificed creature, which is pretty solid if you have a variety of creatures. It's not overcosted in that ability, but the actual cost for the creature is a whopping 8 mana. And if you're playing something for removal purposes, that might be a bit too expensive. But who knows, it might fit into a Praetor theme if you want to build an all-Praetor deck in the future, if that's ever a thing. Number 11 is the one Phyrexian Praetor that did not make the top 10, and that is one of the newer ones from Streets of New Capenna, or a Brask Heretic Praetor. As a card, I don't think this is a bad card. As a Praetor though, we know how impressive they can be. This has probably the worst one-sided advantage of all of the Praetors. That's the one thing that makes them so special, is that they give you an obvious advantage, an obvious upside, and they take something similar to that away from your opponents. This has a place in Commander. I think it would be great in a Prosper Tomebound deck, or any kind of strategy where playing from exile is useful. Other than that, it compared to its previous version from New Phyrexia is relatively unchanged. Stat-wise, it's still a 4/4 for 5 mana, and it has haste. It didn't become cheaper like the other ones did, and it didn't have any different keyword. Easily the least impressive of the Phyrexian Praetors in my opinion. Number 10 is the older Brask the Hidden from New Phyrexia. Again, a 4/4 for 5 mana, and it's going to have haste. Gives all of your other creatures haste, which is awesome, but this isn't hard to do in red. We have cheaper enchantments that give our creatures haste. We have artifacts that can give creatures haste. If you need a haste enabler, or a Brask is not necessary in red, in Commander at least, anymore. The real upside here to this Brask, this is truly a downside for your opponents having their creatures enter the battlefield tapped. Comparing this to not really taking away card advantage from your opponents by making them cast cards from exile is actually going to make a difference, especially in Commander, when entire turn cycles could last a half hour. Still though, you compare this to the other one-sided advantages that the Praetors are known for, and it does fall a bit short. Number 9, we have Sheoldred Whispering One, the original Sheoldred from New Phyrexia. This is one of the ones that has aged. It's shown its age, and that is again because of the speed of the format. When you spend 7 mana, you want to have an immediate impact, and while if it's left alone for at least a turn cycle, you might get a good creature back, while also forcing each of your opponents to sacrifice one, but that doesn't pack as big of a punch as it used to. There are a lot of creature token decks, a lot of decks that actually want to sacrifice creatures, and if Graveyard Reanimation is the goal, having to wait an entire turn is not ideal. Still a solid one though. You measure that one-sided advantage, it's going to be at least more powerful than Brask. Number 8, we have another newer Praetor, this time from the Brothers' War, Geeks Yawgmoth Praetor. Overall, as a card, it's really solid. For 3 mana, you have a great way of getting yourself some more card draw. You have an activated ability that's sort of like a Villainous Wealth. You do have to give up some cards through discard. It doesn't have that one-sided advantage though. I think by design, that's what we expect out of the Phyrexian Praetors. I know Geeks is not the other 5, but that's what makes them powerful. Geeks has the unfortunate potential of whiffing for that 7 mana. You could be giving up all the cards in your hand and not getting that much out of your opponent's library. It's very high risk, high reward, so if you're valuing Geeks just off of strength, I would go with what's more dependable, and that's that first ability. Being able to draw some more cards and also convincing your opponents that they should be attacking each other, dealing combat damage to each other, which is way more political. Number 7, I have Jingataxia's Progress Tyrant. Another one of the new Phyrexian Praetors. This time, instead of a whopping 10 mana, however, you only have to pay 7. You do lose flash, but you have a totally different set of abilities here. Whenever you cast an artifact instant sorcery spell, you may copy those spells and choose new targets, but it only triggers once each turn. So if you cast an artifact for the first time, you get to copy it once each turn. This also means that if it's your opponent's turns, you could cast a counterspell or an artifact or a sorcery with flash and be able to copy it, make it harder to deal with you. The flip side here, which is what makes it really powerful, is that whenever an opponent casts one of those, their spells will be countered, and that only triggers once each turn, so it's pretty much their first one. That is such a pain to have to deal with. They could double up, yes, and get around it that way, but you are playing blue, you probably have answers for whenever they decide to get to their second spell to deal with it, so it makes it strong. It's really that one-sided advantage that we're looking at here. It's what makes the Praetors powerful, it's what we've come to expect. Number 6, we have another newer Praetor. We have Sheoldred the Apocalypse, another 2022 special. Whispering One was a whopping 7 mana, and I know we just talked about Jingataxia being 7 mana, but I think Jingataxia is a little bit more aggressive, and what we get here with Sheoldred is even more aggression. For 4 mana, you get a 4/5 Death Touch, which is already good stats. It's a change of pace. Whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life, and whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. What's so great about this is that it kind of breaks the rules for black. When you draw an excess, your downside, your sacrifice is that you're giving up life for creatures. This basically says whenever you draw a card and maybe pay a life normally, you're instead probably going to net some life gain. And forcing card draw for your opponents is going to be a death sentence. If there is a downside to Sheoldred this time around, is that you're going to need something else with your deck. You can't just throw Sheoldred out there and expect things to happen. That's maybe the only thing I would give to the old Sheoldred, is that if you had absolutely nothing else in your hand, you could at least rely on your graveyard mid to late game. This one you need to follow it up with some card draw, or else you're just going to have to wait for any kind of impact. Still though, going to add insult to injury in a way that most of these other Praetors are not going to be capable of. Number 5, we have Jingataxia's Core Auger, the original from New Phyrexia, the whopping 10 mana one. Yes, I think this is still better than the new Jingataxias. Flash does make a difference. It helps to alleviate the pain of having to spend 10 mana and then maybe wait for your opponents to deal with you. You are in blue, you want to have responses. So how you play this guy, you wait for your last opponent's turn to end, the one that goes right before you do, of course. You flash into play Jingataxias before they end their turn. That way you can free up your mana for your next turn, which is what you want to do for responses. That makes Core Auger still one of the best Praetors in my opinion. And in doing that at the end of the turn, you also get the benefit of forcing down their maximum hand size to 0. Because it's not enough that you get to draw 7 cards at the beginning of your end step, forcing your opponents to discard to 0 is insane. When I said that Sheoldred Whispering One was weak if left alone for an entire turn cycle, it doesn't do that much like it used to. Jingataxias is still going to be a pain. If left alone for an entire turn cycle, your opponents are going to have to draw into their removal. And again, this is a blue creature, which means you're probably playing a lot of counter spells in a blue deck, making it very difficult, especially if you're going to continue drawing 7 cards at the beginning of your end steps. You're just going to keep drawing into more responses, keeping them from doing anything. One of the most ridiculous blue creatures ever made. Number 4, we have Vorinclex Monstrous Raider, the one that started the whole redux of the Praetors. This one from Kaldheim, we have a pretty solid one-sided advantage. If you like doubling season, you get kind of half of a doubling season, where instead of affecting your tokens, this is just for counters. So if you like +1/+1 counters, if you like loyalty counters, if you like anything that would normally affect counters in general that are beneficial to you, you get to double those. Your opponents are only going to be able to get half as many counters as they normally would. This is massive, and it's incredibly flexible as well. You would have to justify a spot for something like Jingataxias because it's so expensive, it's not the most flexible card to play. There are so many counter strategies that would love to have a Vorinclex, but consider that it's also one of the best in combat, a 6/6 trample haste creature. At the bare minimum, what this offers those counters decks is just good redundancy. It's what makes many decks powerful, is that you don't just have one way of getting your lands back from your graveyard. If you're a land deck, you have several, right? If you like to draw a lot of cards, you don't just have one windfall card or one windfall effect, you have others. You have other Wheel of Fortune cards. And in Counters Matters decks, you're going to have more than just one kind of doubling season card. Vorinclex takes that advantage and then also negatively applies it to your opponents. Number 3, I have Alishnorn Grand Cenobite. Looking at the Anthem and the Reverse Anthem, the +2/+2 and the -2/-2, initially people are going to say that's underwhelming even compared to something like Sheoldred, but there hasn't been a game where someone has thrown out an Alishnorn and it hasn't made an impact. I can't really say that for the other Praetors here that I've shown you so far. And I guess that's just because your opponents are guaranteed to have creatures, at least some of them, right? You're guaranteed to have some other ones if you're in white, and that makes a difference. This isn't even considering the fact that you have combos with Alishnorn. You have some pretty rude ones. You could turn all of their lands into 1/1s and absolutely devastate them. You could use something like Helm of the Host and get more Alishnorns each turn. Alishnorn, if you are able to abuse her in that way and get several copies, that's a very easy win. You're preventing them from having a decent enough creature presence to stop yours. If you were to ask me my opinion of her about 10 years ago, compared to the other Praetors, I probably would not have said she's one of the better ones. I maybe would have even put her above Brask, but that's about it. Just because I didn't think that mattered back then. But Alishnorn is such an easy go-to. Surprisingly, out of those original Phyrexian Praetors, she is aged as one of the best. Number 2, however, is the Praetor I think has aged the best, and it's considering the colors that he's in. Of course, Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger, very different from the new Vorinclex. That one's more aggressive, more of a counter focus. Doesn't mean, however, this isn't worth getting to 8 mana. You are in green, so this 8 mana isn't going to be the same as 10 mana in blue. What you get for that is doubling up your land mana. Whenever you tap a land for mana, you're going to get another one of those. And what we can expect is that if we're going to benefit our own lands, we want to hurt our opponent's lands. So whenever they tap a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during their controller's next untap step. So if you like Winter Orb, you like Stasis, you like any of those cards that are typically found in resource denial decks, you get that with Vorinclex. Now, you could play Vorinclex for a variety of reasons, whether you want to be more of a stacks player or you want to be more of a creature-focused deck that really wants to seal the deal. There's not a situation where if you get this out there, it's not going to have an impact, because everyone knows what he does by now, and they better be committed to getting rid of him, because if they delay at all, they're going to wish they didn't. Remember when I said the whole turn cycle thing is the reason why Sheoldred aged and why Jingataxia is still technically pretty good? That definitely applies to Vorinclex and any kind of ability that will prevent your opponent's lands from untapping. Commander games can be so long and excruciatingly painful that way. If you have to wait 20 plus minutes before you get to your next turn, it's going to make you very doubtful of your ability to come back and win. Very powerful because at the bare minimum, you're getting double your mana. And like I said with Monstrous Raider, redundancy is a great thing. There are a lot of mana doublers in green. Add this to your list of mana doublers and you're going to be hurting your opponents at the same time. What's not to like? Now, maybe the most controversial decision here, but for number 1, I have Alishnorn, Mother of Machines. From the upcoming set Phyrexia, all will be one. I've said it this whole video, it's all about the one-sided advantage for Praetors, and I'm looking at all of the other ones. I'm looking at the mana that you spend to get them out there, the possibility to play them as strong commanders, the possibility to throw them into any deck at all. And this Alishnorn has probably the best abilities out of any of the new Redux Praetors, when you just think about the impact in a single turn, what you're capable of doing, and also what you're capable of taking away from your opponents. What you get here is basically if you took Yarok without having to play as many colors, and combined it with a Torpor Orb that also hurt permanents entering the battlefield in general for your opponents. Yes, Yarok was an annoyingly powerful commander for that reason. So long as you had permanents that triggered those enter the battlefield abilities, you were going to benefit tremendously. What I like about this is that you have to go out of your way normally to play Resource Denial. You have to commit to playing cards like Torpor Orb or Hushwing Gryph or Hushbringer in decks that do not have an inherent way of dealing with those abilities. But with this Alishnorn, you don't have to really try that hard to hurt them. You are incentivized to do that with this amazing upside. When we ask ourselves what makes a Praetor so powerful, it is really zero downside for us. The fact that that's how we identify Praetors in Commander, I think it makes them some of the best creatures we could ever play in the format. So that's going to do it for the list here, the ranking of the Praetors. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I don't like prefacing every video by reminding you guys the concept of an opinion. It doesn't matter, that becomes a ritual and I don't like it in videos. Also, I treat my audience like they're adults and they can handle differences. So again, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel. I appreciate it. Commander Void here signing off. I will see you all next time.